Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Environment, Energy, Natural Resources Center at the University of Houston. We're going to wait for a few people to join before we begin our program for today. Thank you. Okay, again, thank you all for joining us. My name is Victor Flatt. Along with my co-director, Gina Warren, we'd like to welcome you to programming for the Center for Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources Law at the University of Houston. Today's program, which we'll be talking about momentarily, is qualified for 0.75 hours of credit, CLE credit in Texas, and you are welcome to submit this also to other jurisdictions for CLE credit. I'm now going to share with you the CLE credit site so that you can scan this. If you can scan this from your phone, this is the thing, all the information that you need. Scan the QR code and it should connect you if you're seeking Texas CLE credit. I'm just going to hold that for just a moment for people to be able to do that. If you're seeking out-of-state certificate of attendance for your own CLE or a different CLE program, you may email Tanisha Green. Her email is listed on the slide. It is tcgreen3@central.uh.edu. All right, we'll bring this back towards the end, but that's hopefully you were able to scan that going forward. All right, now I want to, excuse me, let me just get rid of that, tell you a little bit more about today, our programming generally. This is our virtual conference, the one in a series of conferences, and today's features Professor Uma Altka of the University of Kansas School of Law. You'll be hearing more about her from Professor Warren. The program series is funded by the European Commission under the H2020 program and Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions. The program and the research covers a variety of topics in energy law and climate policy, and is part of the overall program of energy transition law and governance. Each month, we bring together speakers to address topics related to the challenges of our time. We're very happy for the people that can join us live, but even more importantly, each of these are recorded and are available on the ENER website, which I will remind you of again, and we have had a lot of viewers come to that program. Our next speaker will be on May 19th, also at 10 a.m. It's Professor Rebecca Bratspies of CUNY Law, City of University of New York, addressing an energy law and justice topic. For more information, please visit the website, which is www.law.uh.edu/ENER Center. That's EENRCENTER, ENER Center /. So with that, I'm now going to turn the program over to Professor Warren. Professor Warren.
All right, well, thank you so much for that introduction to this program. It's been really fun being a part of this, and so I look forward to today as well. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's speaker, Professor Uma Altka from the University of Kansas School of Law. She joined Kansas Law in 2011 and assumed the role of Associate Dean for Faculty in 2019. Professor Altka teaches environmental law, property law, energy law, environmental justice, climate change law, and her scholarship situates at the intersection of energy law and environmental law. Her work explores the legal context for the low carbon energy transition with particular interest in energy and environmental justice, renewable energy, electricity regulation, and especially as we evolve into a clean, modern electric grid. Her scholarship has appeared in book chapters and many prestigious law journals. She has earned several impressive awards along the way for her teaching and scholarship. She received her JD summa cum laude from the University of Maine School of Law and an MA from Muskie School of Public Service, University of Southern Maine, and a bachelor's from the University of Virginia. Today, she'll be discussing energy law, COVID, and energy load. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Professor Flatt and Professor Warren. I'm really glad to be here with you as part of this series. It's a great topic and couldn't be more timely to focus on energy transition and climate governance for a lecture series. So thank you very much for the invitation to be with you today. I will share my screen with you and hopefully that's coming through okay. I'm interested in talking with you all today about energy law and the attention and importance, I think, an emerging importance of considering low-income households in the context of energy law regimes. And I've been working for some time on a project, the working title of which is Energy Law and the Low-Income Household. And with COVID-19 affecting us in the sudden way with the winter crisis, there's a lot of current events that give some particularly helpful lenses to consider these issues of energy burden and energy law regimes that I'll focus on today. So sort of connecting that ongoing project with current events to, I hope, situate the low-income household within energy law and then connecting it to the home energy access issues that have received a lot more attention during the pandemic than they have in recent years. So I'd like to, let's see if I can get the, is there any way that you can move the bar, Gina? Because I can't get to the arrow for the moving the slides. There we go.
There you go.
I think I was able to do it like that. Okay. First, let's take a step back and think a little bit about where are we in energy law? This is a lecture series on energy transition. Energy law has been in transition for many years, decades really, in big picture ways. So looking back several decades, regulatory restructuring from the traditional utility structure where vertically integrated utilities, restructuring to change the ways that utilities could sell their power, changes to the ways that newcomers had access to the grid. We had the introduction of regional transmission organizations operating wholesale electricity markets. We've seen in recent years in particular increased clean energy on the grid. We've seen significant declining use of coal, increased decentralization of energy generation, with increasingly distributed energy resources, lower, some of the largest power plants, a shift away from that model, beginning to see electrification of end uses, certainly the projections out for shifting to a decarbonized grid calls for electrification of vehicles and other end uses. Innovations in energy resources. We've seen a lot of transition, innovations in terms of energy storage, in terms of demand response, a lot of change, and I think it's fair to say it's been not just a dynamic, immediate couple of years, but even just overall of these decades, significant change. So what about low-income energy policy? Where has this been in all of this change? And it came to my attention as I was researching this over the last year. This is really one part of energy law that has been notably static over this period of time, over these decades. And so it's interesting to take some time to think about, why is that? Should that be the case? What could change? And at a point in time when we have seen the effects of energy burden and disproportionate energy burden among some parts of our population, and is this an area we might want to see some changes in? So that's sort of a starting question for me as I approach this. And I want to draw your attention to start from when I say it's been mostly the same, at least at the federal level, what federal low-income policy really has been primarily is the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, called LIHEAP. This has been in place since 1980. The Home Energy Assistance Program Home Energy Assistance Act was passed in the Congress in 1980. And it was a result of, in the 70s, new attention being drawn to the volatile energy markets, rising energy prices, and a sense that there was, social and political concerns around this issue, that energy burden and the cost of energy was too high. And so LIHEAP was a response to those rising prices. And in 1981, so that's 40 years ago, we essentially got the LIHEAP in basically the form that it is today. So over 4 decades, there hasn't been significant change in the basic structure of the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. So it sets a basic eligibility for financial assistance to deal with home energy costs at 150% of the federal poverty level for household income, or 60% of the state median income. And the administration of this program, it has to be annually appropriated by the Congress. During the Trump administration was, as far as I can tell, the very first time in the history of the program that the White House had marked it for significant reduction and elimination, which the Congress overrode. But it is not something that's a fixed funding source that will always be available. Every year it needs to be reappropriated. And the funds are allotted from the federal government, from the Department of Health and Human Services, through that is allotted to grantees. They're called under the statute, states, tribes, and territories. And the grantees have some discretion within those federal boundaries in allocating the funds and determining income eligibility. So how are most of the LIHEAP funds spent? Primarily on heating and cooling expenses, mainly heating, crisis assistance, a defined term, energy efficiency, weatherization assistance in many of the states, and then in some cases, repair, replacement, outreach to try to connect these benefits with people who need them. So this is the structure. So think of really what federal low-income policy, energy policy has been, is a similar approach to other kinds of financial assistance, whether that be for food or any of the other programs that are based on income level, not a program all that different from other kinds of programs designed to help people with who are dealing with income limitations that are affecting their health and well-being. The point being, it's not really energy, it's not incorporated fully into energy law, in that sense, and yet it is our energy policy. And to give you a sense, of course, the federal poverty guidelines, HHS warns against using the term federal poverty level because that obscures some of the key distinctions the agency makes, but it's changed over time. And this graphic gives you a sense of how the federal government is defining these poverty guidelines in 2021, slightly higher in each of these family household sizes for Alaska and Hawaii. But you can see this is a fairly low threshold for being able to qualify for the assistance under LIHEAP. If we think about then energy law and household insecurity, the National Energy and Utility Affordability Coalition identifies that as of 2019, the national poverty rate was 10.5%. That's 34 million Americans living in poverty. And more than 90% of the LIHEAP recipients, so those who receive LIHEAP funds based on the eligibility criteria set forth in the statute and adapted by the grantees, have at least one vulnerable person in that household, which is defined as a senior citizen aged 60 or older, a child aged 18 or under, or an individual with disability. So to give you a sense, each state is, because the grantees receive allotments according to a complex formula. It's not something that we need to discuss in this setting, but you can see some of the range. So I'll just give you two examples, Kansas and Texas, and then we'll compare that overall. But if you are interested in looking state by state, the coalition has that information available. You can see in the state of Kansas, they show the LIHEAP funding reduced between fiscal year 2010 and fiscal year 2020. So over a 10-year period, significant reduction in LIHEAP funding for the state. The number of households eligible for LIHEAP in Kansas, 301,000, and the number that actually received LIHEAP in Kansas, just over almost 34,464. Look on that red line below there. Only 11.43% of the total lines received LIHEAP in 2020. So it's always been below the amount of need to be met across the United States. For weatherization, right? So weatherization involves changes to a home that make it more energy efficient, reducing energy burden by reducing the costs of electricity, the costs of energy for heating and cooling. In 2019, there were nearly 40 million households eligible based on income guidelines for weatherization assistance, but less than 0.5% of that need was met. So on the one hand, some of the LIHEAP funds go to home weatherization, most goes to utility payment assistance, and payments go to a utility, not to an individual. But weatherization had even less of the percentage of eligible households with their needs met. So this gives you a picture of when we look at this current picture against the static quality across 40 years, against the backdrop of a highly dynamic energy law environment, it brings to mind the possibility that there might be some ways that, rather than treating the low-income households' interest in electricity regulation and energy regulation for heat and home use as not simply something to be addressed through financial assistance, but perhaps in structural ways. Let's consider the household. What's really, there's been a good amount of research recently that gives us some more sense of what is household energy burden. So this is some data from the Energy Information Administration showing that households that experience energy insecurity showing, and this is data from 2015, over 30% report some kind of household energy insecurity. Then you go down to the next, over 20% having reduced made choices on other necessities in order to pay an energy bill, right? And then over 10% keeping the home at an unhealthy or unsafe temperature. And then at the bottom, it's showing you how much of the year that kind of worrying and stressful situation was affecting the household. You're fortunate in Texas to have an excellent research institute focused on energy poverty, the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute. And here's some of the recent research that they've done in terms of what are those trade-offs that households will make when faced with insufficient funds, an energy bill. And on the left, you can see clothing, food, transport, technology, medicine, childcare, how all of these kinds of things that are part of a household budget. Those are the kinds of things that are skipped. Most important here, you can see they've highlighted households delaying or skipping food, 29% of low-income households, making that very difficult trade-off. On the right, you can see specific to Texas, where TEPRI scanned to see where, in which sectors Texans are employed that are most affected. And so those in food service, accommodations, et cetera, you can see where people are working and still experiencing these really difficult household challenges with their bills. Here's some additional data from the Energy Information Administration showing the household characteristics of homes experiencing high energy burden. So as you can see, and this should come as no surprise in connection with the LIHEAP program, the lower the income, the higher percentage of people are experiencing household energy insecurity. Where there's more children, higher chance of having that experience. Older homes, there's a feature, because there's lots of different factors that can go into why is the energy use at a particular structure high. Sometimes it is based on income level, or it's a combination of factors. There may be physical attributes of the structure, poor insulation, poor ceiling. If it's an older home that that's very drafty, are there inefficient appliances, inefficient lighting? Is there, these are all aspects of the building itself, right? Also climate, where is it? Is an area that's very cold? Is it usually fairly temperate? So those are all factors that would kind of go in with the aspect of where's the home built. But we see some really troubling trends as well. So, with differences across racial groups and the level of energy burden was tracked by EIA. Now, some recent research American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy has looked very closely at energy burden and found some additional information that gives some texture to what is really the level of energy burden and the problem to be addressed. So if 25%, according to AC, of US households, 30 million households face a high energy burden, that means paying more than 6% of their income on energy costs. The average is about 3%. That's 25%. 13% face severe energy burden, so more than 10% of their income on energy home costs. And then if they isolate into low-income households specifically, and here at a high, they're including more because the federal poverty levels are so low, they're including a bigger group as the low-income households. 67% experience a high energy burden. And of those, the majority are not just high, but severe. And so very troublingly, we also see from their research that when you compare the median energy burden of Black households to white households, the Black households are paying 43% higher percentage of their income. So the higher energy burden, 20% higher in Hispanic households than white households, 45% for Native American households than white households. So we can see that there are serious social justice aspects of this when we talk about energy justice and remedying the past environmental harms of the energy sector. This is a very real, personal, and immediate experience of energy justice and equity that is critical to address. You saw from the EIA, the data was from 2015. Right now, EIA is gathering a lot of new residential energy consumption information. And so we'll have a lot more data come 2023. So that was the most recent that they have, but they've in that time been collecting additional data and adding new aspects. So as you can see here, they're showing the sample size over time of the different points in time when the EIA has done the residential energy consumption survey. And as you can see, for the 2020 target was to do 18,000, much higher. So we will have more information, more clarity about the energy burden experience of households in the next round of data that's released. So one of the key things that's, I think, a lot of this data draws out when we connect it with climate, as you're doing in this series, is to see that health is a really significant consideration, and that negative impacts on health flow from insecurity in terms of energy access. So we know that energy access is considered a requisite of modern life. And so LIHEAP is the safety net, but that has not been funded to a level that it has been able to serve everyone who has that need. And yet lack of access to home heating and cooling, which is something that's always a pressing potential experience for people who are living in chronic energy insecurity, is associated with increased health problems, as well as stress, since often there's other financial stresses being experienced in a household that's at risk of having their energy disconnected. The case of Linda Daniels in New Jersey that gave rise to a new statute in that state is really a sort of glaring example of how how disconnection policies for utilities affect households can have the effect of make the difference between life and death. So Linda Daniels was a woman living in Newark, New Jersey. She was dependent on oxygen at all times in her home. She was unable to work. She's dependent on family for her basic needs in the course of the day, needed to have electricity at all times for her health and survival. And she had become overdue by hundreds of dollars on her electric bill. And there was a spike in the temperatures, a heat spell that hit New Jersey in 2018. And during that time, she was receiving notices that her electricity would be turned off. Her family paid $500 down on her bill, tried to ask the utility not to disconnect. It wasn't enough. 2 days after they paid the $500, Linda Daniels' utility was disconnected, her electricity, and she ended up dying later in that day. Now, the utility did a review of what took place, saw that there were errors by the staff, but the state of New Jersey passed a law to require utilities to know who has medical needs for electricity, and to have certain timeframes that they have to follow in order to be able to disconnect for such a person. Really just a heartbreaking story of how much one wouldn't necessarily think that disconnection, it could be a matter of life and death, but that she's not the only person who's dependent on electricity for her well-being and survival. If you're interested in learning about the likely and anticipated impacts of climate change in your region, the fourth National Climate Assessment released in 2018 goes region by region across the United States. And it is sobering to read how temperatures and weather extremes will affect various regions as well as other impacts. So showing that all policy related to heating and cooling access, energy for heating and cooling, has to be in close dialogue with expected climate impacts. That's the way that we can, begin to think through, as the faculty at Houston have been doing for some time, resilience, climate adaptation in energy policy. And the fifth National Climate Assessment update is expected in 2023. So when COVID hit last year, and everything, we had job losses across the country, we had upheaval across the economy. There were very significant impacts in the context of energy insecurity, as you can imagine. So the National Energy and Utility Affordability Coalition reported and has been tracking the effects of COVID on LIHEAP recipients and that eligible set of households, found that more than a quarter of those who lost jobs during the COVID crisis reported skipping or needing to skip a utility bill payment. So we already had the unmet need, right, that has been in play, that's been a chronic aspect of low-income home energy assistance. But this connects it even to people who may or may not ever have been eligible before. They also found 22% of utility customers reported they had reduced or put off expenses for basic needs. That's a high number, right? Comparing it to those that we've seen from the earlier research. So COVID-19 exacerbated the same set of problems. And in doing so, it's also drawn more attention to the issue of energy burden and brought people's consciousness around what is energy burden, what are the disparities that it reflects, and how might it be addressed? Now, in the CARES Act, in subsequent bills, there's been appropriations to increase the funding of LIHEAP in response to this, as well as, of course, for food, for rent. But we, looking across all of those, everyone has seen in the news the challenges of receiving those funds in a timely way. So clearly the energy insecurity here is very closely connected as well to housing insecurity, to the risk of evictions, et cetera. There's a lot at play for people, particularly those who lost their jobs during the COVID crisis. One of the reactions to this was, and the National Energy Assistance Directors Association has been tracking the shutoff moratoria due to COVID-19 and tracking states that suspended disconnection of gas, electric, and water. And so you can see on the left, the 17 states that at the point in time that they generated their data, there were a number of states that still had in place suspensions, but the majority of states either didn't have suspensions or made them voluntary or had let them expire. And so you can see that what resulted was a patchwork of protections. It's not a uniform protection for people for utility shutoffs across the country. It was inconsistent and varied significantly state by state. At the same time, so they also showed, okay, so in terms of state-ordered moratorium, 37% of the population was covered by that sort of midpoint in the pandemic. But the majority didn't have a state-ordered moratorium, or it had been put in place, but with a short time horizon and had expired. Now, utilities also, even in states that didn't have state-imposed moratoria, many utilities did put into place temporary disconnection moratoria as well. And a lot of utilities and states have limits based on certain times of year, based on weather issues. There's already some protections built in just based on weather. But so this is specific to COVID. The Congressional Research Service reported that by mid-2020, so the COVID crisis was a few months in, over 1,000 electric power utilities serving 88% of US customers had implemented some kind of moratorium on disconnection. Varied in scope, duration, conditions, and of course, that just simply having a moratorium on disconnection doesn't eliminate the underlying bill, right? And so that's the arrearage that begins to build up for that individual. And especially if it's someone who lost their job, they're also behind on rent, they're behind on multiple things, not just, of course, their electricity bill. And so most of these, according to the research, was even when these moratoria were in place, most were ending in March and April of this year. And that was after several extensions. So the bills in many areas will come due. The projections based on the increased number of people in financial need during the pandemic is that 33 million families will be eligible for LIHEAP, and that's 5 million more as a direct result of virus-related layoffs. So that means that's a measure, an approximate measure of how many people, how many households were added to that eligibility during the pandemic. So add to that, of course, we had the winter crisis. So I want to tie these together in a way so that we can think about what each of these events and their occurrence in such close proximity to one another time-wise reveals or suggests about energy responses to burden and insecurity. I think what we saw, I mean, everyone in Texas knows this even more, although Kansas and the Plain States were affected as well with certain, blackouts for, rolling blackouts in the Plain States. But of course, in Texas, the crisis went on for some people for days. The amount of the volatility of the pricing exposed the radical differences in energy insecurity. It showed, on the one hand, energy insecurity of the individual households, which connects to the discussion of energy burden that I've just gone over. But it also showed that the reliability and insecurity that we feel that was perceived in the grid and the power infrastructure itself are closely linked. So in looking to do post-winter deep freeze crisis reform, reliability and resilience of the infrastructure is critical, both for every use of electricity that we have, businesses, et cetera, but noting that it really revealed the inequities in terms of the insecurity that people experience and how they were able to reinstate their power and the kinds of resources when if you don't have resources to fall back on, the experience of losing energy access was so much more severe than people who had the resources to go and travel to another state or find a backup energy source, et cetera. So a couple of things taking us forward to thinking about, well, if now that energy burden has received a lot more attention, energy justice, both in terms of the environmental impacts of the historically fossil energy focused and derived energy sector, as well as looking ahead to how to distribute equitably the benefits of a clean energy transition. We're only a few months into the Biden administration, but we have a few indications of how the administration may decide to bring resources and connect them to these problems. So the executive order issued in published in the Federal Register on February 1st, Order 14008, Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, addressed a number of things related to the electric power sector. But specifically relevant for energy burden was Section 223, the Justice 40 Initiative. And in this, by this executive order in this section, the Biden administration created a government-wide goal of delivering 40% of the overall benefits of climate investments, federal climate investments, to disadvantaged communities. So how this may be used by federal agencies to assist with energy burden is that one of the specifically identified areas of focus in the executive order was clean energy and energy efficiency. Both of these, if energy efficiency is achieved through weatherization, through new housing codes and new buildings that meet energy efficient standards, through energy efficient appliances, as well as clean energy, if, for example, through distributed energy resources being channeled to low-income areas. These are ways to reduce energy burden over time. As far as weatherization, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACE, looking back on data of how much weatherization has saved customers, residential households, when weatherization has been added to their homes, it could reduce low-income household energy burden by 25%. That's really significant in terms of individual home experience, but also how far LIHEAP funds can reach to help people. And one of the things that when we see that it doesn't reach as many people, when we see that those troubling numbers of the unmet need, one of the assurances, even though states have a fair amount of flexibility in the way that they structure their distribution of funds, they have to prioritize under the statute those with the greatest need. And so people with the greatest need will get the funds, but then there's still so many more people that have slightly less dire need, but still really significant. If you reduce the energy burden, the need for the funding through LIHEAP in moments of crisis can be reduced over time as well. Finally, another good indication from the Biden administration that a focus on energy burden and energy justice is important to the entire federal government, but particularly of interest is the Department of Energy, the first ever Deputy Director for Energy Justice. I saw you have a talk planned at the University of Houston soon, a conference where Shalonda Baker, the new Deputy Director, will be speaking. And this is excellent. It's really big news. It's really significant. This has never been something that the Department of Energy has focused on. And the DOE is the agency that contains a significant part of the weatherization programming. So there's a lot of potential now with someone in that department who understands these issues to assist with making this topic more salient and a priority. And then finally, we can see that, where are rates set? They're always set at the state level for retail customers. So a number of states are beginning to consider what are strategies that they can use to increase affordability of energy in their states. We have cities beginning to set energy burden goals. So part of this moment of transition that's beginning to include low-income energy policy is without doubt going to have to be at the state and local level. If there's the recent report from AC gives current overviews, if you're interested in details of state programs and cities, really interesting and good guides for areas that are interested in pursuing some of these. And so what we'll see is obviously funding the unmet need is really important. Programmatic reforms to connect energy efficiency, weatherization, distributed energy resources via something like the Justice 40 Initiative, if it were adapted in similar form to state and local levels, outreach, making sure that people know and can know that they are eligible for the funds and know how to access the funds. And then the potential for structural reform, funding for consumer advocates, which have historically been woefully underfunded. And those are the advocates who are representing the interests of low and middle income consumers in the public utility commissions. And every single time a utility goes in asking for more money and higher rates, it's consumer advocates that are providing a counterpoint where they exist. Not every state has an office representing consumers. And then finally, just a point that additional interveners now are playing a really key role, because consumer advocates are not always the ones, the groups who know the most about what is coming and what the potential is for different aspects of the energy transition. And so nonprofit groups that understand energy transition and energy change are now finding ways to intervene and share that knowledge in a way that can be beneficial, both from an environmental standpoint, low carbon shift, but also representing a change for consumers as well. I'll stop there and happily take any questions or further discussion if you'd like.
Wonderful, thank you. That was great. I have so many notes here that I was taking as you were writing, as we were talking. So I have a couple of questions for you. Let's see. So let's start with here. So I have a question about isn't the whole electricity system like a dual policy for reliability and low price itself, right? And just thinking about how that's a low income energy policy. So delivering the most reliable at the cheapest price out there. And it seems like there was always concerns that the renewables or other clean energy initiatives were going to create rising prices for them. And so what are your thoughts on that?
I guess the way that I've viewed it is there's a balancing, of course, the public utility commissions are doing between what is seen as an affordable price for electricity and what is a fair rate of return for a utility. And yet it's always been known that whatever is that number that a utility commission arrives at as, affordable is not going to be affordable for everyone, right? That's always been known. And I think the assumption has been, well, we have LIHEAP, right? We have these financial assistance programs to take care of anyone who falls in that category, right? I guess from my view, that's not enough when we look at the fact that historically the need has been so dramatically undermet. So I think that raises a number of questions. First, are the benchmarks for determining what's affordable realistic? Are those has there been so much too great of a reliance on a perceived availability of financial assistance that it's altered or adjusted in a way that's not appropriate or not serving well-being to set an affordable rate that's really not affordable, right? I just think that there's been a bit of complacency in trusting we've got that covered on the other side when we see that it hasn't been.
And so kind of playing the devil's advocate in this one. So there are many that would argue that actually one of the problems with our electricity is that our bills are not high enough because they don't take into account the true impacts of the energy delivery system. And in fact, if they were higher, then people might conserve more or consider shifting to more energy efficient appliances or something like that. And so what do you think about that argument? And if that is the case, how would you balance that with this inequity of still trying to protect lower income or affordable electricity?
Well, I guess I'd say this. I mean, obviously, energy law can't solve the problem of poverty, right? It's one bill. It's a really important bill, right? Because energy access is so critical. So it's a really, really important part of the picture in supporting households that are struggling with bills for basic necessities, but it's not the only one. So financial assistance, it makes sense for that to be a key mechanism for assisting, right? It doesn't mean in no way, I mean, we want that program to be retained, to be grown, right? So we've seen it's been static in a way that there's a very good quality to the fact that it's been static. Because it's been underfunded though, and hasn't changed, it's as if the energy, the utility commission rate setting process has operated as if there's an assumption that's enough. So it's not there's in no way would we want to disrupt in any way what LIHEAP provides. You'd want to fund that more, but in a moment of transition and reform, think about how might the way we're addressing rates support that goal, right? By doing some of the things you just said, supporting the increased energy efficiency, increased weatherization. It's true for a lot of customers, having a higher bill would lead to those kinds of behavioral changes, right? If you have a higher bill and if you get information, and this is one of the good trends that's happening now, is giving consumers more information. If you know that it's going to cost, that you're going to use a lot more electricity running your dishwasher and your washer and dryer at certain times of day, and you're able to see that and track that information, and just simply, if you just didn't know that before, right? It's very easy to just say, I'm going to wait 2 hours and do it at a later time. I think many consumers are in the position to use information about their own use and cost in a way that's very helpful. In a household that's really struggling to pay basic bills, energy, food, transportation, I think the ability to make improvements on appliances that are more efficient, those are just not going to be realistic without financial assistance. So I think it's less encouraging as a mechanism for dealing with that, but with people who are really struggling. But it is a key change happening now of giving consumers more information and control for a large percentage of the consumers on the grid is really beneficial.
Sorry, my dog just decided to go crazy there. It was another question came up as you were speaking and giving your answer to that last question is, would it be better to just give money to low income folks so that they have their own incentive to reduce and conserve electricity as opposed to providing only money for energy?
I think there's a lot of good research on this and differing views. LIHEAP has always given the money to the utility that way it's assured to pay the bill. But there's certainly very cogent arguments out there that simply giving funds unrestrained will be used effectively and is a better approach. I mean, one of the challenges with programs that are for financial assistance is it is and one of the reasons why it's not just unmet need, but it's not as if every eligible household is coming and seeking it and being turned away. There's lack of information, there's lack of outreach, there's challenges and confusion in filling out forms. There's, just a lot of, infrastructure and paperwork and interaction that needs to take place. That's very complicated if you're not, accustomed to dealing with it. And so I think that would be one benefit of simply giving funds, but there's lots of different views on that. That's not ever been how this program has operated. But it provides, especially in crisis. I mean, this has been a constant source of support for 40 years. It's just been underfunded. And it was very concerning over the last several years and to see White House budgets looking to eliminate funding in this area. It was sort of shocking given the consistency over the 40 years that this had enjoyed. And that was one of the reasons that I began to start really trying to think about, well, what are the ways that energy law might structurally reduce the need for LIHEAP? It will never be totally eliminated, but help to ease some of that unmet need, as well as complement what it has been able to do as a very successful program to, make energy burden less of a source of suffering in so many households.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I think that we probably are out of time. So
we are almost out of time. Good to hear the dog bark, though, Professor Aka. This has been wonderful. And as both Professor Warren and I know, and going through this winter storm and the unavailability of electricity and all the deaths that resulted, and also with COVID, highlight how important this is. And it does seem like there are some positive moves from the Biden administration on this, which will be continuing. I'm going to, before our time completely runs out, I'm just going to share the screen again for the CLE. So I'm going to do that first. And there we go. Again, if you need CLE credit, that is there to scan for Texas. And otherwise, you can email Tanisha Green at tcgreen at central.uh.edu. And in addition to that, I'm going to now stop that share. I wanted to thank you for referring to our upcoming program, the North American Conference, the 5th annual North American Conference, which will be also a webinar online on May 11th, the morning of May 11th. And as you noted, it features our very first Deputy Director for Energy Justice. And she's also, I know, she's been nominated now also for a new Senate appointment on equity and energy. And I think this is a very important thing that's happened to recognize this concept of energy justice. And I know your work has contributed to that a lot. Anyone who's interested, please feel free to go to the Ener Center website. You can go to /North American 2021, but you can also find this just on the Ener website. We would love to have you come. I believe this will be Deputy Director Baker's first public address about the programs that they will be doing. So we're really looking forward to that. Again, we will have our next speaker on May 19th. It will be Rebecca Bratzpiece from CUNY. We will be posting this recording within 24 hours, and we will send that out to the attendees and also to our listserv and environmental law professors. Thank you again. This is wonderful, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. This is very interesting. So
thank you so much for the invitation. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
thank you.
And goodbye.